Prince Andrew, we are being told, has decided to relinquish all of his royal titles and duties.
Buckingham Palace has just released a final, earth-shattering statement following the shocking DNA confirmation of Prince Andrew's secret. And it's unlike anything the royal family has ever faced before. For months, rumors swirled about a mysterious investigation quietly unfolding behind palace walls. Now the truth is finally out, and the revelations could rewrite royal history forever. So what exactly did the DNA results expose? And why did the palace wait so long to respond? Today, we uncover the scandalous details behind this explosive royal revelation. The secret prince, Andrew, tried to forget. Long before news networks circled the story and royal commentators filled the airwaves, there existed a quiet secret that never made its way into the official pages of history. It was a simple story at first, one of youth, gentle affection, and choices that would later cast a long shadow over a royal life. Before scandal, before controversy, before DNA became proof, there was only a young prince searching for freedom far beyond the reach of Buckingham Palace. When reporters began digging into Prince Andrew's early years, they did not expect to find anything unusual. They were only looking to fill in the small gaps of his naval past. But as they pieced together overlooked photos, forgotten testimonies, and whispers from decades ago, a single name kept resurfacing, faint, almost erased, but never fully gone. That name belonged to a woman who lived far outside the polished world of royalty. A woman who, by every measure of royal expectation, was never meant to be remembered. The story takes us back to the early 1980s, when the Duke of York was a young naval officer at sea. His duties carried him across the Mediterranean, a period his former shipmates still describe as the happiest and most unguarded time of his life. Away from palace protocols, he was not a prince in those moments, but simply a sailor among sailors, laughing over shared jokes and enjoying nights free from royal eyes. It was during one of those bright, sun-splashed months in Gibraltar that his path crossed with hers. She wasn't famous, powerful, or polished by aristocratic circles. She worked at a modest cafe near the naval port, serving tea, pastries, and little handwritten notes of encouragement to young officers who stopped by before their next deployment. The first encounter between them, according to an old friend, happened by pure chance. Andrew had forgotten a small journal on the counter. She chased after him, returned it with a shy smile, and he thanked her with an unexpected warmth. From that accidental moment, something began. Something neither of them planned. Soon, they were seen strolling along quiet piers and talking for hours under the Mediterranean moon.
Hug and public displays of affection are not something that I do.
His friends would later recall how transformed he seemed in her presence. Lighter, freer, relieved of the invisible weight he always carried. She made him laugh, a rare, unguarded laugh that even palace staff seldom heard. Their connection was not built on royal pressures or social expectations. It was simply two young adults trying to feel normal in a world where normal life was almost impossible. But even the sweetest moments struggled against reality. As deployments shifted, his ship moved on to other ports. They exchanged handwritten letters, filled with promises they hoped could survive distance. But royal duty does not wait for love stories, and time has a way of thinning even the strongest hope. Within months, the letters slowed, then stopped. Silence replaced affection, and the young woman, heartbroken, slipped quietly out of public view. Those who knew her said she moved to southern France, carrying only memories. And something far more permanent. She raised a daughter in peace, a little girl with her eyes and a quiet spirit. To friends, she spoke only in fragments, saying her child's father once wore a uniform, kind, important, and forever unreachable. To shield her daughter from a storm she could not control, she buried the truth beneath silence. But secrets do not disappear. They wait. Years passed. The royal world marched forward through ceremonies, scandals, celebrations, and loss. Meanwhile, a grown daughter in France stumbled upon an old photograph, faded letters, and initials that made no sense at first. Curiosity became suspicion. Suspicion became determination, and soon, a forgotten love story was on the brink of becoming a royal crisis. Now everything was about to hinge on one unexpected document. But who wrote this document, and why now? Stay glued to your screen because the real shock has only just begun. The envelope that shattered the palace silence. It began with a whisper, not the loud, scandalous kind that tabloids feast on, but a murmur that slipped through palace corridors when guards changed posts and chandeliers stopped swaying for the night. Inside Buckingham Palace, where secrets are layered thicker than the gold on its ceilings, someone spoke a name that had been buried for decades. The claim attached to it sounded unbelievable at first. Another child, tied not to rumor, but to royal blood itself. At the start, no one took it seriously. The palace had seen its fair share of wild stories, secret romances, hidden letters, alleged affairs. Most headlines faded in days, swallowed by the next news cycle. The royal press office knew how to smother a spark before it became flame. But this time, the whisper didn't die. It spread quietly and dangerously, not through gossip magazines, but through private circles, staff murmuring behind closed doors, fragmented conversations at charity galas, phone calls ending the moment questions grew too specific. And then came the envelope. It arrived on a gray, rain-soaked morning, small, plain, and addressed to the palace's private office. No crest, no return name, no hint of origin. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but the moment it was opened, everything changed. Inside lay a photograph of a young woman with piercing blue eyes, a single lock of light brown hair tied with an old ribbon, and a chilling message written in bold strokes, "You know who I am. DNA will prove it." Suddenly, the whisper had a heartbeat. The items were quietly passed from desk to desk until they reached the private secretary. Within hours, the palace's polished calm fractured. A secret meeting was called behind sealed doors. Advisors argued over whether to respond, to deny, or to destroy the evidence entirely. But the photo could not be dismissed. The experts confirmed it wasn't edited or altered. The hair was real, the threat was real, and the possibility behind it was even more unsettling. Who was the woman? What did she want? And was she connected to Prince Andrew in a way no one dared say out loud? Within days, palace security traced every lead, but the courier who delivered the envelope vanished like mist. As silence tightened around the royal household, the outside world began to notice small shifts.
Peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
A strange rumor surfaced in a gossip column. A cryptic tweet appeared from a royal watcher. Soon, major newsrooms were circling, sensing a story the palace was desperate to hide. Behind closed doors, Prince Andrew reportedly dismissed the letter as nonsense. Yet witnesses noticed something unusual in his reaction. Not anger, but unease. A flicker in his expression, a shadow in his voice, as if an old memory was clawing its way back. Soon, a second wave of documents appeared. More photos, more hints, more pieces of a past someone had tried very hard to erase, and then a second envelope surfaced, more alarming than the first. Inside, it was a photograph of young Prince Andrew in his naval uniform, his arm around a smiling woman the palace could not identify. Tucked beside it was another strand of light brown hair and a new message, colder than before. "You know the truth." Now the palace could no longer pretend. Phone lines buzzed. Lawyers were summoned. Senior officials locked themselves in a private conference room. Blackmail? A setup? Or the one possibility everyone feared? Undeniable truth. Surveillance records were checked. Security logs examined. Still, no trail. No fingerprints. No camera capture. The envelope had arrived like a ghost. Meanwhile, outside the gates, London moved as if nothing was wrong. Tourists snapped photos. Royal guards marched in rhythm, and the city breathed on. But inside the palace, the calm was shattered. The monarchy, built on control and tradition, now faced a threat that could slip through its fingers. Because this time, the claim was not built on rumor. It came with proof waiting to be tested. A single test that could expose everything. If that shocked you, then brace yourself, because the DNA evidence is even more unsettling. Let's break down the proof no one can deny. the DNA that shook the crown. It didn't arrive with shouting, threats, or public drama. The truth came quietly, like a cold wind slipping through a locked window. Impossible to stop, impossible to ignore. For years, the palace had gambled on silence, believing that rumors would fade and questions would die on their own. But one test, one envelope, and one undeniable scientific result shattered that illusion forever. The private meeting took place in a heavily guarded room deep inside Buckingham Palace, far away from cameras, reporters, and curious eyes. Only 5 individuals were allowed through the heavy double doors that afternoon. Prince Andrew, the palace's top legal advisor, 2 senior aides, and a representative from the laboratory that conducted the test. No phones, no recordings, no written notes. Just a silent agreement. Whatever happened in that room would determine the future of the monarchy. When the envelope was opened, no one breathed. The paper was unfolded slowly, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire palace held its breath. Then came the number, a 99.97% DNA match. There was no misreading it, no debating it. No elegant royal statement could spin or soften what science had just confirmed. Prince Andrew stared at the page, blinking as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. Color drained from his face. The legal advisor closed his eyes and whispered 2 words that froze the room. "It's conclusive." No one spoke after that. The ticking clock above the fireplace suddenly sounded louder, sharper, unforgiving. In that moment, titles, privilege, and royal image meant nothing. DNA doesn't bow to crowns, but secrets do not stay buried inside palace walls, no matter how thick the stone or how loyal the staff. Within hours, whispers slithered through royal corridors. By morning, someone had leaked just enough to spark a fire that the palace could no longer control. A single hint reached a trusted journalist.
On that particular day that we now understand is the date.
And by sunrise, every major newsroom in London was chasing the same story, a royal DNA scandal under review. Cameras swarmed the palace gates. Reporters shouted questions. No one would answer. Online, the story exploded. Some demanded recognition for the unnamed woman at the center of the revelation. Others insisted the monarchy was preparing a stunning announcement. Conspiracy theories multiplied by the minute. The palace pressed no comment on every call, but silence only made things worse. Without answers, the world created its own. Behind closed doors, the Queen's inner circle gathered. Should they destroy the evidence? Should they deny everything? Or should they face the truth head-on, no matter how painful the consequences? Advisors warned that a cover-up would eventually collapse. Science could not be erased, and the public had already sensed blood in the water. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew became withdrawn, pacing private halls like a ghost. He whispered that there must have been a mistake, but deep down, even he knew the truth was unbreakable. You can challenge witnesses, question timelines, and discredit rumors, but you cannot argue with biology. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late that night, the Queen was presented with the document. She read it slowly, her face unreadable. When she finished, she placed it back on the silver tray and spoke only one sentence. "Then we must do what is right." By the next morning, the world was in full frenzy. News channels cut into regular programming. Commentators replayed old photos. Parliament members debated. Polls showed public trust in the monarchy dropping like a stone. And as the crowd outside the palace grew, people everywhere began to ask the same chilling question. If they hid this, what else have they hidden? The monarchy's greatest fear was no longer the DNA itself, but what would come next. Keep watching to find out. Panic behind the palace walls. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace had changed. What was once a place of strict order and cold elegance now felt tense, fragile, and unpredictable. The mysterious envelope had already unsettled the inner circle, but in the days that followed, the unease grew into something far more dangerous. Whispers became fear. Fear became urgency, and urgency soon edged into panic. This was no longer merely a family issue. This was a threat to the crown itself. Inside the restricted rooms of the East Wing, the Queen's most senior advisors met behind closed doors. Normally calm, their voices now carried strain. Files lay scattered across the polished table, newspapers piled in corners, and unfinished cups of tea sat cold and untouched. No one could ignore reality anymore. If the story leaked before the palace controlled it, the monarchy could face a blow it might never recover from. Beyond the gates, reporters were already gathering in greater numbers. Satellite vans lined the streets. Microphones and cameras pointed at the palace as if waiting for it to breathe wrong. Every news station was circling the same question. Every tabloid drafting headlines about hidden heirs and DNA secrets.
We keep up a firm pace because there's so much to do. There are so many opportunities.
No one in London cared about any other story now. The monarchy was on the brink, and the world wanted answers. Inside, chaos worked quietly. Phone lines rang without rest. Press officers rehearsed statements they prayed they wouldn't have to deliver. Legal teams combed through decades-old documents, looking for any shield they could find. Even seasoned staff, who had served the royal household for decades, walked the corridors with tight jaws and downward eyes. They knew the palace had survived wars, divorces, deaths, and scandals. But this rumor, if true, could destroy something even deeper: legitimacy. Prince Andrew had vanished from sight. His wing of the palace was guarded, his curtains pulled, his schedule wiped clean. Some aides said he was furious, snapping, shouting, insisting the claims were lies meant to ruin him. Others whispered he looked haunted, pacing through the night, unable to shake one terrifying thought: what if proof existed? Meanwhile, the advisors argued with rising intensity. Some demanded a bold response: tell the public everything, seize control before the press did it for them. We must face this head-on, one advisor insisted. Silence will only make the world believe we're hiding guilt. But another group argued the opposite. Silence, they said, was tradition. Silence was survival. The monarchy never chased rumors. They outlived them. If we respond once, an opposing advisor warned, we open the door to every accusation that follows, and we will never close it again. The argument dragged on until the Queen's private secretary brought it to a cold halt. His voice was steady, his message final. There would be no public statement until the legal review was complete. Until then, the palace would say nothing, not a word. But one question still loomed, one no strategy could avoid: when to tell the Queen. Her health had been fragile, and doctors urged caution, yet she had to know. When she was finally shown the contents of the envelope, those in the room said she did not speak at first. She stared at the photo, at the strand of hair, at the letter. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked the only question that mattered. Is it true? No advisor answered. Night settled over London, but no one inside the palace slept. Every step, every conversation, every decision now felt dangerous. They were running out of options, and they knew it. This was no longer about one man's scandal. It was about the survival of the monarchy itself. The walls of Buckingham Palace had protected secrets for centuries, but this time, the truth was breaking through, and nothing could stop it. What does the palace say about this? Let's find out. The confession at the palace gates. For days that felt like months, the world waited in a restless silence. Every newsroom, every podcast, every social platform buzzed with unfinished sentences and unanswered questions. Morning shows brought breaking updates that revealed nothing. Evening panels debated what the palace refused to explain. All eyes stared at Buckingham Palace, but the gates remained shut and the windows stayed dark. The royal silence was its own kind of thunder. Then, on a cold, cloudy Thursday at exactly noon, everything changed. Television anchors paused mid-sentence as producers shouted into their headsets. Across continents, screens flashed the same alert. An official notice had just been posted on the gates of Buckingham Palace. It carried only one line, but that single sentence sent a shockwave through every corner of the globe. Emergency press briefing at 3 p.m. No excuses, no delays, no royal wording to soften the blow. For the first time, the palace had agreed to speak, and the world knew the moment of truth had arrived. Within hours, London transformed into a stage. Outside the palace, thousands gathered shoulder to shoulder, Tourists, protesters, royalists, skeptics, and the simply curious. Giant broadcast screens were set up along nearby streets to stream the announcement live. Cafes emptied, offices paused, even schools tuned in. This wasn't merely a royal update. It was history unfolding in real time. Inside the palace media hall, tension wrapped around the room like a tightening rope. Journalists from every major outlet fought for position. Camera tripods formed metallic forests. Microphones crowded the podium like weapons aimed and ready. No one spoke above a whisper. No one blinked too long. Everyone knew that what they were about to hear would be replayed for decades. At exactly 3 p.m., the double doors opened. A single spokesperson stepped forward in a dark gray suit, her face pale, her expression carved with caution. She adjusted the microphone, exhaled once, and began to read from a sheet of paper in her hand. Her voice was steady, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. After extensive review and consultation with independent experts, the royal household confirms that the recent DNA findings are accurate. These results establish a biological link between His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and the individual referenced in recent reports. The room didn't gasp. It didn't breathe at all. For 3 long seconds, the silence was absolute, heavy, suffocating, unforgettable. She continued, choosing every word as though it might shatter if spoken too loudly. The Duke acknowledges the findings and expresses profound regret that this matter was not addressed sooner. The royal family recognizes the pain caused by years of speculation and silence and extends support to the individual affected. No denial, no excuses, no elegant phrasing to dull the impact. Just truth, plain, uncoated, and irreversible. The monarchy remains committed to transparency, integrity, and the values that define its service, she concluded. We ask that all parties be given privacy as this matter is addressed within the family. And just like that, she stepped back. No questions, no clarifications, no second statement. For a long moment, no one moved, as though the entire hall was frozen in disbelief. Then chaos erupted. Reporters shouting, flashes bursting, cameramen scrambling, analysts already dialing in for live reactions. But the spokesperson was gone. The palace had spoken once, and that was all it intended to say. Around the world, reactions poured in like floodwater. Some praised the palace for finally telling the truth. Others were furious, accusing the monarchy of hiding the scandal for years. Commentators called it the most shocking royal admission of the modern era. Streets outside Buckingham Palace became emotional battlegrounds. Some people cried, others cheered, and many simply stared, struggling to process the moment. Inside the palace, the Queen watched in quiet stillness. She had weathered abdications, divorces, betrayals, wars, and relentless public storms. But this was different. This was not the crown versus the world. This was blood, legacy, and consequence, laid bare in daylight. The palace may have spoken, but the story is far from over. Now, the daughter has finally broken her silence, and what she revealed has sent shockwaves everywhere. Let's dive in. The secret daughter who shook the palace. For most of her life, she had lived in the background of the world, far from palace gates, public cameras, and royal conversations spoken in polished halls. Her days were quiet and predictable. A small rented home, a few loyal friends, a job that paid the bills, and at the center of it all, a box of fading photographs and a mother's soft voice in her memory, speaking of a man in uniform with kind eyes and a promise that the world never allowed to unfold.
My government's priority is to deliver a national recovery from the pandemic.
As a child, she thought it was a bedtime story. As a teenager, she wondered if it was a secret. As an adult, she realized it was a truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. Now, after decades of doubt, that truth was no longer a whisper in a family kitchen. It was an international headline tied to the most protected bloodline in Europe. And when the world learned her name, it demanded to hear her voice. So she agreed to sit down for her first televised interview. The studio lights were soft, nothing flashy, almost as if the producers understood that her story needed no dramatic frame. She looked calm, dressed simply in a muted blouse and a small pendant that once belonged to her mother. No diamonds, no gold, just sincerity, resting above a steady heartbeat. When the cameras began rolling, there were no lawyers, no palace guards, no interruptions, just a woman finally given the space to speak. The interviewer asked about her childhood, and the moment suspicion first took root. She explained how small clues had followed her like shadows, questions her mother never fully answered, half-written letters tucked beneath floorboards, and a childhood photo of herself standing beside a man whose face had conveniently disappeared from the printed copy. She recalled the confusion, the curiosity, and eventually the determination to know who she really was. "My mother didn't want drama," she said softly. "She didn't chase titles or attention. She only wanted me to understand where I came from. She told me that when the truth finally rose to the surface, I should face it with dignity, not anger." Her voice steadied, but her eyes told the story of sleepless teenage nights and a lifetime of unanswered questions. She described how she wrote letters for years, letters to offices, charities, officials, and even private secretaries connected to the royal household. She waited for replies that never came. Some letters were returned, some disappeared, most were ignored. She admitted that at one point she convinced herself she was foolish for holding on. "I thought maybe I was imagining everything," she said. "I thought I was chasing ghosts." But then the DNA results surfaced. Unavoidable, scientific, irrefutable. Suddenly, the story that had been dismissed as fantasy was now front-page truth. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shake her head in triumph. Instead, she spoke with a grace that caught everyone off guard. "I don't want a crown," she said. "I don't want money or a title or special treatment. I just want the truth to stand, so my mother can finally rest in peace. I want the world to know that she wasn't lying, that I wasn't lying." Millions watched in silence. Viewers who expected anger found compassion. Commentators who anticipated blame found forgiveness. Even critics who arrived ready to doubt her suddenly had no ground to stand on. And for the first time, the public saw her not as a scandal or a mystery, but as a daughter, someone who had spent her life seeking a name, a history, and a place to belong. Near the end of the interview, her voice trembled slightly. "I don't hate the royal family," she said. "I understand people do desperate things to protect what they love. But truth has its own clock. It doesn't stay buried forever. And when it comes, it doesn't destroy, it frees." When she finished, she offered a small, tired smile, not victorious, not bitter, just relieved. And in that moment, even the palace's harshest critics paused. It was no longer a scandal about royalty. It was a story about identity, healing, and a woman who refused to be silent. Just how deep will this scandal cut into the heart of the monarchy? With the truth now exposed, what will the crown sacrifice to survive? Keep watching as we delve into the details. Fallout. The crown and its consequences. In the days after the palace's announcement and the shocking interview from the daughter at the center of the scandal, an unusual calm swept across Britain. But it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy quiet that lingers after a violent storm, when the winds stop, but the damage remains for everyone to see. Buckingham Palace, once seen as a fortress of control, tradition, and unshakable order, now seemed smaller, almost wounded, under the pressure of a truth it could no longer command or contain. Inside those historic walls, the atmosphere shifted in ways no royal advisor could ignore. Meetings that once echoed with formality and polite laughter became tense gatherings filled with hesitations, pauses, and nervous glances. Words were no longer spoken freely. They were measured, weighed, and examined before being released into the room. Even the most confident officials walked carefully, aware that one slip, one careless phrase, could spark another wave of outrage. For the first time in living memory, the monarchy was forced to confront a question it had long avoided. What does accountability look like for a royal? Ideas once unthinkable began to circulate behind closed doors. Reform, transparency, verification.
Let me begin by saying thank you to all the thousands of kind people.
These discussions weren't coming from protesters outside the gates. They were now being whispered from inside the palace itself. The Queen's choice to acknowledge the truth had split opinion across the family. Some senior royals praised her decision, describing it as a moment of honor and strength, proof that the crown, at its best, stood for duty, morality, and justice. Others, however, were quietly furious. In their eyes, the monarchy survived not by bending to the public, but by rising above it. They feared that the moment the crown allowed the world to judge it, the aura that sustained its power would begin to crumble. But those closest to the Queen said she never wavered. In a private conversation, she reportedly told one trusted aide that protecting the truth mattered more than protecting the throne. History, not public relations, was her concern, and she believed history would remember courage, not denial. In the weeks that followed, a series of subtle but meaningful changes began to unfold. A new internal procedure was introduced, heritage verification, designed to prevent hidden claims from ever blindsiding the monarchy again. Teams of historians were quietly sent into the archives, examining old records and confirming bloodlines with modern standards. Legal advisors drafted updated policies around transparency, a silent admission that secrecy could no longer serve as the palace's strongest shield. Outside the palace gates, the public response was deeply emotional, but surprisingly reflective. Some citizens felt a renewed respect for the royal family, believing that honesty had given the monarchy a chance to evolve instead of crumble. Others saw the revelation as a permanent stain, proof that the fairy tale image had always been an illusion. Late-night talk shows, newspapers, and commentators debated endlessly. Was this the beginning of a more human, more responsible royal era, or the first step in the monarchy's slow, inevitable collapse? Meanwhile, the daughter who had shaken the crown with her truth quietly disappeared from the spotlight. She turned down television offers, avoided cameras, and released no further statements. The only public sighting was a single quiet moment. She was photographed placing flowers at the palace gates. The image spread across the world within hours. A young woman standing alone before towering iron bars, mourning, healing, or perhaps letting go. No caption was needed. The photograph itself became the symbol of a painful chapter the monarchy would never erase. As night settled over London, Buckingham Palace stood illuminated against the dark sky. The royal crest still gleamed above the gates, but it no longer represented flawless perfection. It now symbolized endurance and the heavy price of truth. The monarchy had survived, but it had been changed forever. And deep down, the nation sensed that this story was only the beginning, not the end. If a secret of this magnitude could break into the light, then what other scandals tied to Prince Andrew have led people to believe this might just be true? Stay tuned, because what comes next will leave you stunned. How scandal shattered a royal life. For decades, Prince Andrew was known as the charming Duke of York, a man who moved with ease through the world of wealth, power, and luxury. But behind the polished royal image, controversies were slowly piling up. Controversies that would one day shake the monarchy and destroy his public standing. His troubles didn't begin with Jeffrey Epstein, but that scandal became the greatest blow. Long before the world linked his name to a convicted sex offender, Andrew had already earned an uncomfortable reputation. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, tabloids tagged him as the royal family's party prince. Cameras constantly caught him stepping out of nightclubs, vacationing on yachts, and surrounding himself with billionaires, models, and businessmen whose backgrounds raised more questions than answers. His expensive lifestyle and questionable friendships set the stage for the storm that would eventually engulf him. That storm hit when his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein resurfaced. After Epstein's 2011 arrest for sex trafficking, the public demanded to know why a senior royal was connected to such a man. Things worsened in 2015 when Virginia Giuffre accused Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell of trafficking her to Prince Andrew when she was still a minor, claims he firmly denied. But the real turning point came in 2019, when Andrew sat for a BBC Newsnight interview, hoping to clear his name. Instead, it became a disaster. His explanations, including the now mocked claim that he was unable to sweat, only fueled public anger and global embarrassment. The fallout was swift. Despite Buckingham Palace issuing repeated denials, pressure on the royal family refused to fade. In 2022, Andrew quietly settled Giuffre's lawsuit out of court for a reported multi-million-dollar sum. Soon after, Queen Elizabeth II removed his military titles and royal patronages, effectively ending his role as a working royal. Additional stories about questionable financial dealings with foreign businessmen only deepened the damage. By 2024, Andrew had disappeared from public life, his name permanently tied to scandal. And no matter what he does next, the shadow of Epstein remains the central and devastating chapter of his legacy. So what do you think will happen now that her voice can no longer be ignored? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.